Hi, my name is Phil Johncock, and I'm the shelter consultant for Ashland's Winter Shelter. And in the video today, I'm going to show you a couple of things that related to the handout. So somewhere on this YouTube page, you'll be able to find the handout, download it, and it'd be good to do that. Maybe pause the video, and then you can come back and I'll refer to some of the items that are in your handout. It's a 16-page handout. The purpose of this is to document, or we've documented the process, the model program that we've created in Ashland. In the last 6 months, we've been hard at work to try to run a 7-night-a-week shelter in 4 different locations. And it's worked out great. We have, everybody is pre-screened. We have 100% of the folks have medical coverage, 100% of them have transportation. We have a success rate of people getting into housing. So those are separate things that I'll talk about. This is what the model is. It's a sort of the organizational structure behind the model, and to have some information for you about the helping people. It's more than just shelter. We're hoping to help people get into housing, get into employment, and on the road to self-sufficiency in 9 different categories. And so we're going to go over that basically. So I'm going to, as you look through the document, on the first page you're going to notice at the top, Access. Access is an organization that's in Medford. They're providing the funding, and so 58% of the funding for the shelter comes from community. It's a match, community match, and most of that comes from volunteers. You'll see some information here on volunteerism for the first, up to the period of, I think it was through the end of January. There are some additional information that I will give you, but Access, they have a vision. So when I'm looking at all the funders and community partners that we have, Access is one of 12 community partners that's been part of the winter shelter. They have a vision that is really 3 words: respect, self-sufficiency, and service. So what we've done with Ashland, behind the scenes with Ashland Winter Shelter, we look at respect with the guest agreement form. All the guests sign a form the first night of the shelter. The second one of self-sufficiency have to do the 9 categories, and you'll see this in the handout later. Service is, we started service with the guests doing as much of the work at the shelter as possible. When we eventually, and we have everything in place to have shelter starting in November of 2019 in one site, and that will be completely, I hope, completely run by shelter guests. So that's what we mean by service. Then also there are some performance measures that are important to keep in mind. These come from the Oregon Housing and Community Services performance measures. The target is 30% of the people in the program will reside in permanent housing. I'll tell you that 33% right now are housed, and they're going to grow. That number is going to grow because we have year-round case management. So the shelter season starts November and goes through the end of March. This year ran a little bit later than that, but the case management is 12 months out of the year, and you'll see more about that here in this handout. The second point is, of those people who are placed into housing, 80% of those will stay in housing after 6 months. So that's something that's important to check with ORA. So think now this is being recorded in April. We're looking at October and as being the 6-month point. So that'd be a point to check and see how are those folks doing. So those are things that I wanted to start out and just recognize are the main state funding coming from Access, and that these are important to keep in mind. As we move into the organizational overview and the staffing, I'm not going to read all of these things. I'm just going to point out the things that I think are important for anybody new coming to this that you won't get when you read it. So you can read this later. On the first, so let's look at the second page, and I'll just move through these as quickly as I can. The grievance procedures is something unique that started this year. We provide a pathway back in, so if somebody is exited for a behavioral issue, we typically, unless it's something severe, physical violence, something else, then we provide a clear pathway back in. There is an appeal process and exit interviews. This is not widely known outside. It's mainly for the hosts and the people working in the shelter, but just know that that's a unique quality of the shelter model. In the under the program overview description section, it has the dates, November 1st through March 31st. Everybody is pre-screened and approved with a bed reservation for the entire season. That's different from a drop-in center where you just, they're there for the evening. So transportation will be provided to folks. What's used to assess people is what's called a service prioritization decision assistance tool. That's a mouthful. And that's the tool that's used to screen folks. And in Ashland, they go to the resource center, which is next to Safeway, in order to be screened. The intent of the program, that becomes a really important, I would highlight that, and I would put an asterisk next to the first sentence of the intent, because that is really key. And I will just read that over, that the intent of the program is to provide immediate and long-term solutions to our community's chronic, veteran, and most vulnerable homeless along the continuum of care path towards self-sufficiency while fostering self-respect and service. So there we've got those three keywords that the funder has. So that's important. On page 3, if you look at section D, 2D, which would be activities, there is an acronym, ROMA. You may not be familiar with it. It means results-oriented management and accountability. So we have a specific goal. I would highlight that the first few sentences up until the bolded area, because it refers to how the program reaches that goal. And the result in bold there is that an individualized roadmap from crisis of immediate need to temporary support stability on a path of self-sufficiency and even thriving is the goal. So if you understand a self-sufficiency matrix, people come in at a certain level that's usually crisis. Thriving is the top level of self-sufficiency. So how do we get people from this is usually a couple of steps. You got up to vulnerability is the next step, and then stable or self-sufficient to get up to thriving. So in these 9 categories that you're going to find out about, we're helping people move from crisis, and some of them we move immediately up to self-sufficient and stable. Some of those in certain areas like employment, we're not able to move them up that fast. But the result is an individualized roadmap that both our volunteers they're doing and our paid staff. So we've got case managers and volunteers all working to help our individuals move along and move up the ladder of these steps. Under C, you'll have the city and county information about what they say about homelessness. Page 4, up at the top, section G, it talks about the screening. It introduces a program called Built for Zero. Built for Zero is what we're proposing, and we put in funding for this that will bring in experts from across the country and key federal agencies, including HUD, to support us and also all of Jackson County in developing a comprehensive system that leads to housing stability for our chronic and veteran homeless. Then section H talks about the data collection system. When we get into volunteers leveraged into section I, I'll give you some of the current data based on 22 weeks of shelter. We have 5,959 hours of volunteerism. We have 1,252 positions. That's a 60% increase over last year. And then down at the bottom under section K, we ended up having a total of 129 people screened. So this was written earlier on, so that you can modify your information. So page 6, I'm just going to jump ahead, is the budget for the next 2 fiscal years. Funding, this will not be the exact amount because this hasn't been approved yet. It probably won't be approved till May, and there'll probably be some negotiation because Access will not probably fund the entire amount. So then page 7 gets into the model. This was developed of staffing. This was developed with the night coordinators. And if you look at page 8, you'll see when moved into 2082 East Main Street, the structure is such so that we would have hopefully a navigator on site, and that's also coordinating, supervising the guests. So this would be the service piece that we talked about. The hours would be of the shelter would be 6 p.m. in the evening till 10 o'clock in the morning. So there are some shifts in the morning and the evening that will work. Then also on the left you'll see community meals. This may change, and we already think that it probably will, but the way the structure worked this year is that we had a guest would go to the community meals and then they would go to the shelter in the evening if they could. Some people didn't go, but that's the structure. Then on the right, you'll see the resource center next to Safeway, and the time that is 9 to 2 are the hours that's available. We have in the budget stipends to pay the overnight hosts. We have a volunteer host and a host in training and a fire watch coordinator. And then we would have programming and then food and things going on at the same time as well. The description on page 9 is a description of all of the staff members. Page 10 is a schedule that you have, just a tentative schedule. And page 11, I want to draw your attention to are the 9 categories of self-sufficiency along that self-sufficiency matrix that focus on, and I mentioned that we have 100% of our guests have medical coverage and transportation. So we have given out or we purchased over 3,700 rides. Then in all of these areas there are, if you imagine people at a crisis level, how can we help them move up to at least be self-sufficient? So one of the things we do is page 12. On the first night of the shelter, we assess whether they have Oregon Health Plan. We have 100% coverage. Do they have the SNAP food stamps? Do they have bus passes? Do they have IDs, birth certificates, driver's license, etc.? Do they have phone, mailbox, and a housing plan? Page 13 explains the Built for Zero model that I talked about before. This is one that we have a group from Jackson County that's already gone through an initial meeting, and there's some a timeline for how this will be developed, but this is an overview. They developed, they're out of the East Coast, but they've worked with over 64 communities to help. They have a name-by-name list, and they've reduced to 0, which is functional 0, which means that if you think of the inflow and outflow, the inflow of people coming in and the outflow of people into housing, if the numbers coming in, so let's say we got 100 people coming in, we have 100 people placed at the end, then it's a functional 0. So once you have people in the system, then it's working with the chronic homeless and the veterans first. Those are the first people, but it has a funnel which gets them, and a name-by-name funnel that the whole county can use to help people get into housing. So, so that's on page 13 and 14. page 15 and 16 is and this is in the proposal, is one of those areas of money management is a big issue. People, oftentimes our guests, we notice a lot of people at the beginning of the month have lost or have get their money, get paid, and so they go into hotels. People are at various degrees of money management, but as they start moving up the ladder and they start getting more money, this particular model was developed out of New Mexico State, and it's based on the knowledge of low-income clients. And instead of teaching them and lecturing or advising them, it coaches them. It helps them with their debt management, all of their spending plans, and they're a coach. A coach works with them specifically. So this is just one example of those 9. So that being said, I'm just going to say that there are some subcommittees that will be working over the summer, and that will be addressing, a lot of the issues. So we wanted this to be a prerequisite to be able to understand more of the structure. You can take these and read them at your leisure, and yeah, it's great, and let's keep sustaining the model that's been started this year.